starting with Leslie, I think the argument that what is happening in Zimbabwe is not new or unique to Zimbabwe is almost like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it helps us understand that our problems are not unique and that we can learn from others, but on the other hand, it can also appear like a justification. You see what I mean? So we've got to be careful how we use the idea, because I mean, someone can simply say, look, people fighting in parliament, they've been bigger fights before, bloodier fights elsewhere. He doesn't say anything about the opposition, state of the opposition. It's normal, right? But I think that it would not do justice to the question. I think that what we need to understand, speaking as someone who understands, or at least who has worked with the opposition, I'm not a historian, but I understand the gravity of history. I understand that, it's very easy to extract and say that we are now in this bubble called the new dispensation, and then to cut ourselves out of what has happened before. The behavior that you see the opposition responding, in my opinion, might be explained by those frustrations, those historical. These are people who have hit brick walls. These are people who have gone to the Constitutional Court, which my brother spoke about, and they don't believe in it anymore. I will tell you, in 2013, I was working with Morgan Tsvangirai. We withdrew our application from the Constitutional Court for a strategic reason, because we knew that we were not going to get justice in the Constitutional Court, and that we were simply going to allow the system to get endorsement from the court. We knew, because the Constitutional Court judges, we had opposed them during the constitutional reform program, and we said they should go. They were never going to give us a fair hearing, so we withdrew. So these are people who have gone through this, who in the past they have gone to report a matter to the police, and what happens to them? They get arrested. So I think that it's easy for people to say, oh, the behavior yesterday, or the behavior on this other day. I mean, come on. What has ZANU-PF done over the past 38 years? I mean, what have they done? I mean, do we say that, do we have a ruling party because of that behavior? We do. But I think that our view of the opposition and our analysis of his behavior has to be nuanced, has to have a historical context and understand what is going on. My view, I have not spoken to them, but I think that there are people who are protesting. They may be protesting in a manner that is not amenable or palatable to other people, but that is their view. Some people may say, well, look at the Speaker of Parliament. If anything, I actually think, in my own opinion, I never commented on it, but since I've been asked, that the Speaker of Parliament went overboard and actually disgraced Parliament and the government of Zimbabwe, because that reaction was uncalled for. It was unnecessary. Parliament is sacrosanct. You don't call other arms of the state to come and do what they did on that day. Parliament is privileges. Parliament is systems. And so, I think that, it's a matter that has become, elevated and become bigger than it should be. I think that we have to understand it as part of the contestations that are taking place in Zimbabwe. And like I said, part of the contestation, there are probably some people in the MDC who don't agree completely with what happened yesterday. And it's part of all those things that have taken place over the years. On the issue of regional developments, you've got to remember also, we've got Tanzania, Winston. When Magufuli came in, people were very happy with him, hailed him as a hero, and some people who had read a little bit more and understood the history, they warned us and said, you guys are going to be careful. And now you say they were right, because he doesn't seem to have very much regard for certain things, certain rights and so forth. So I think that what is happening in Angola is interesting, but I don't know much about Angola to comment on what exactly is taking place in that country. Zambia is quite interesting. Zambia, this guy came in, he's a lawyer, you know, he should know things better, but look what he has done, you know, look what he has done. But there's also South Africa. I mean, you mentioned, you missed South Africa, you know, Julius Malema, EFF, and then ANC. They are now response to the land question. Where is it coming from? How does it connect to Zimbabwe? So, you know, all those I think are important things to consider and take into account. As for young people, you know, it's a good question that you raised, you know, on young people. And you also mentioned young people. But young people, you know, this is what I've always said, that if you look at the history of struggles, nobody is ever going to open space for anybody. You're going to have to fight for that space. The challenges that Zimbabwean young people are facing, and some of the issues of apathy and so forth, we saw it with Brexit here in the vote in 2016. People woke up and said, oh, we should have gone to vote. They never did. So those challenges are also there, and you've got to, I spent some 6 months in Washington, D.C. this year, and I met young people from Pakistan, and they were presenting their issues about young people's challenges in Pakistan. And I called them and I said, you know what you're telling me is exactly the same thing that I would hear from a Zimbabwean or a Zambian. So the commonalities again that you see. So I think that solidarity is important. I think it's important to engage, to learn what other people are doing in other countries, to see how they are managing to break those barriers, but also I think just to be up there, to be upfront, to take the space, you know, to be available. I think that is key. Young people have got the energy.
But in Zimbabwe, it's kind of difficult because they've expressed their hope. That's what you would expect, that hope will be respected. And if it comes to a situation whereby you express something, the authorities, so to say, come down and what that choice, and you're going anywhere.
Then perhaps there are Brexit. There are the options that perhaps one might think of, but perhaps cannot be spoken about here. I will leave it to my fellow panelists to engage.
Over to Marshall.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alex, for your responses. And thank you for those that have raised questions. I'll try and just summarize and see if I can answer in my response. But going back to Leslie, I think your initial question about that, do we really have an opposition in Zimbabwe after what is happening? You know, I've got a lot of respect for our political space at the moment. I think it's fair to accept that yes, we have an opposition. But I think what is actually missing is that people understand that Parliament is a place where ideas are cross-pollinated and they are used to formulate policy and to support people. People go into Parliament to represent constituents, not to represent specifically their political parties that they stood for. So I think there's a lot of misconception when people gang up together to do a certain thing representing certain constituencies. I think this is what people need to understand, that the agenda in Parliament is for the constituents they are representing rather than the political party they are representing. So I think both ZANU-PF and MDC and all the political parties, if they understand that they are in Parliament representing their specific constituencies and they must champion the cause of their specific constituents, that's what comes first ahead of what the party is intending to do. And I think if we address that holistically and collectively, we'll be able to progress with our politics collaboratively as a country. So that's my answer to that. And then going to Dr. Mann, you talked about transformation and looking at the regional impact of the changes that are happening, for example, in Angola, and what do we learn from that and learn from that as Zimbabwe. I think what we need to learn specifically again is that the problems we've had in the past is that there had been a lot of emphasis in strengthening the power of the office of the president to the detriment of the state. And I think we saw it with Dos Santos. And I think, Alex, you said we should admit, and we saw it again in Zimbabwe. I will admit it, that we saw it again with our former president, that the emphasis was specifically on the office of the president. Yeah. And then once you give all the power to the office of the president, then it becomes very difficult to democratize the state and to let the voice of the people take place. And I'm glad to say President Mnangagwa has made it very clear that the voice of the people is I will not finish the statement. So I will not But again, in that respect, what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to say that it's important that we embrace democracy fully and ensure that the arms of the state that should be ushered with the responsibility of coordinating development or assisting in anything that has to be done with the state are strengthened, and not the office of the president. So I'm against bad politics, which places a lot of emphasis in giving power to the president as opposed to the government. I think the government should be empowered. And then going back to answer Mercy to your question about opportunities, that frustration that there's nothing that is really happening. I do understand, but again, I think we also need to be very fair and open in when we're analyzing the issue of opportunity, that where exactly are opportunities? Where are we facing challenges? Are we facing challenges with youth empowerment? Are we facing empowerment challenges with job creation? Are we facing challenges with entrepreneurship? Are we facing challenges with international trade and investment? Which sector of business? Where exactly do we focus on? Because if we generalize and say that, oh, nothing is moving, the whole space is corrupt or it's shut down, I think we'll be doing an injustice to...
I think it's already highlighted the areas that are...
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's fine, yeah. But I concur with you that there are challenges, so I'm not going to say there are no challenges. But I just want to say sometimes it's better when we're looking at challenges to kind of like break them down, because I can certainly, I've been inspired sitting here by, in that same environment, this lady, Annie has highlighted challenges, but she said she has not let the challenges deter from setting up a business. She has continued, although the ease of doing business is an issue, but she has really persevered and continued to do it. And I can tell you, without being a prophet, claiming to be a prophet, that her enthusiasm and resilience will ultimately lead to success. So I want to encourage you that despite the impediments, despite the challenges, do not give up. Things will improve. I've got a personal experience also that I went to Zimbabwe to establish a business. It took us time to get our regulation done because our business requires a lot of regulation from ZERA and all the other places. Yes, there were challenges in doing that, but I found an opportunity in the challenges, because when I spoke with one of the directors at ZERA and said, listen, this is out of order, that you've got regulations, but you... ZERA, it's the board...
Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority.
Yeah. And then I said, you're the regulatory body, you're asking for specific information. I've provided you with that information, but you don't seem to understand the information. But legally, you're asking for the information. So what we did is that we then decided as a company that there's actually an opportunity of setting up a training company that will train government how to enforce regulation. So it's an opportunity. Out of a problem, you can actually find an opportunity. And I think it's high time that we collectively start to think that the areas and spaces where we are facing challenges, we should actually provide the solutions in starting a business to resolve.
Okay, but what she's saying, I think what she wants to hear is she's trying to emphasize that this is a tried and tested area. She's exhausted all these things, and she doesn't see a light in the end.
Perhaps I can help with that.
Yeah.
My organization engages the Zimbabwe government at policy level. And by the way, Alex, thanks for your contributions. And I would like to comment on the neoliberalism aspect with regard to Mugabe and the fact that he closed that out. 2 weeks ago, we hosted Dr. Lijo. He's a senior civil servant in the office of the president and cabinet. And they were here for exactly that purpose, that the ease of doing business, especially with regard to people here in the UK and the diaspora in general. I'm sure you've heard of the name ZIDA, the Zimbabwe Development Agency. The idea being that they acknowledge the issues that you raise, and what they are saying is ZIDA will become a one-stop shop with an office here in London, another one in South Africa, another one in America, for the purposes of, they will be bypassing possibly the embassies because of the inertia that is generally associated with our embassies. But as you are aware, that the actual statutory instrument is going through the parliamentary process as we speak. So that is at policy level. So the idea would be that the one-stop shop under ZIDA will facilitate your ability to register your company online, deal with immigration issues, ZIMRA, and open a bank account, and all the information in all the key sectors that you want to invest in. That will include mining, agriculture, tourism, you name it. So it will be a one-stop system. So these are some of the changes that this particular dispensation is working at. Can I answer some of the questions?
Yes,
that
please.
are here? I'll start with the issue of the opposition Leslie raised. My issue with what happened yesterday, Leslie, is the fact that, you see, a lot of people don't like Trump. They don't like him, you know, maybe because of what he looks like or what he says. But guess what? They respect the office of the president. Yeah? You may not like ED at a personal level, or whatever you think is associated with. But the point is, he is the office bearer of the presidency. You should respect the office of the president, not him as a person. So that's where we get it wrong. When we say the presidency, we are respecting the office, giving the office the respect, its place in our institution. It's the presidency. Is Zimbabwe number one. So what transpired yesterday is simply, to me, disrespect. It is not protest. And as my colleague said here, it amounts to making a mockery of our system, of the leadership. That on its own should never have a place in our politics, whether it's the opposition, whether it's if Chamisa was on there and Zimbabwe was doing it, it is wrong. We need to respect the office of the president, period. Anything else is a sideshow. That's on that one.
Before you go any further, is that not the challenges of democracy? Because on one hand, people want the freedom to express themselves. So is this democracy going haywire in Africa? Over to you, Dan.
Well, I think one of the many toxic legacies of colonialism in the world is oppositional political systems. You know, China doesn't work on that basis, and China's becoming increasingly influential in the world. There are other ways of having multiple voices heard that don't require that solidifying into two oppositional parties. But because of the history of colonialism, and because that has been implanted across the world, thanks to, you know, our mother of parliaments, nobody ever questions whether that's actually a good way of trying to run democracy. And which goes back to your question about, you know, is there an African democracy and is there a Chinese democracy? And to say that democracy is failing in Zimbabwe because an already toxic system of oppositional politics is being used in a context where there are huge, real, everyday problems where we have, you know, people have relatives who are dying. And the best way to resolve that is not to have a system where people are set up to fight each other. So I think this is the system there is at the moment. I'm not saying, you know, we can wave a magic wand and change that. But Zimbabwe doesn't have to do democracy that way. It's a colonial heritage, and Zimbabwe can choose to challenge it.
So that is then Africa reinventing democracy. And I think
for the benefit of the whole world.
If I'm understanding, the challenge there is that we have our own traditions and there's religion and there's tribal differences, which is not necessarily in the Western world. So how do we then begin to define democracy in our own countries, in Africa, and in particular Zimbabwe? And so this is where it's critical. How far is demonstrating and taking you back to the 1st of August? You have to wonder, is that democracy, or that's democracy gone haywire? How far should people be allowed to demonstrate? I'm talking in terms of destroying property and vandalizing. This is throwing it to you to think about it, and maybe it's something that you would want to throw back to the to the panel. Over to you, Lloyd.
Can I comment on that? I mean, our constitution, even the constitution of 2013, enshrines that aspect that people should be able to demonstrate and express their sentiment with regard to what they don't like in a system. But like in all legal principles, your right to demonstrate should not violate the next person's rights to exist in an environment that is not violated by your demonstration. So don't let your rights, violate mine. So if we have a situation where a grouping, a political party, or a group of individuals thinks that their rights are more important than the rights of the other Zimbabwean, already we've crossed the line. So the person, we should ask ourselves, at what point do the authorities kick in to say, okay, this is too far? Should we have allowed them to sit there in Parliament after having disrespected the head of state and carried on and allowed him to read his budget speech? What message would that send to the country? So these are the issues. Yeah? Yeah?
Bear with me one moment. Have you exhausted all the questions?
Well, let's get on because I'm sure
Okay,
we're
over to
overtaken
you,
by,
sir.
give this,
No, I'm looking at the morality of what you're actually saying, like just how far do we really have to go when you can, how do you justify celebration and actually, for example, the November 17 last year, didn't it happen in Parliament? How would you compare it with the incident that happened just possibly yesterday? I think it was unnecessarily offended in the violation of the laws that govern the August House. How do you explain it?
I have a different view to Alex's view of November 2017 as being a coup. For me, November 27 was an internal dynamic within the ruling party. It was a power transfer.
Look, sorry, yeah. When Gordon Brown kicked out Tony Blair, was it a coup or was it a leadership change? Sorry.
It's getting quite heated. I'm going to let you stop.
Sorry.
And we're going to go to the
Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, what do you say, Mr. Brown?
Right. My questions are rather threefold. There's an aspect which has been brought to light with regards to the democratic dynamics in Zimbabwe. Notably, I think one aspect that we've not discussed is the issue to do with sanctions and the impact of ZIDERA on Zimbabwe. The reality is the sanctions are real, right? And that does not mean I'm oblivious of the other factors, the other contributory factors that have led to the sanctions being imposed. However, my question is around responsible citizenship. How far do we go as citizens when we can go abroad and call on sanctions on our own country? That's the main question that I'd like to raise. Secondly, the aspect of free and fair elections. During the elections,